Hi, I'm David Scranton, and thanks for joining us today as we talk about financial scams, and particularly those scams that target older Americans in or near retirement. And unfortunately, yes, this issue has intensified since the pandemic. But don't worry, because we're here today to help you identify and hopefully avoid a lot of these scams. So first, I want to bring in Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, a retirement income store in Melbourne, Florida. Jeff, as usual, great to talk with you today.
Great to be here, Dave.
And of course, this is our great opportunity to introduce today's special guest, and that's Dr. Marc Faber. He's an economist and the publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom newsletter. Marc, thanks again for being back with us here on The Income Generation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Marc, I've got a special treat for us. I've got your Gloom, Doom, and Boom report right here from October, and I'm admiring the very first title. It says, how can we expect favorable outcomes from economic interventions, et cetera, et cetera. However, how can we expect continued economic outcomes that benefit, let's say, our viewers and our listeners without Federal Reserve intervention and the expansion of the Fed's money supply and debt? Are we codependent on that now?
Well, asset markets, as you know, are by and large expensive. Stocks relative to GDP are very high. The price to sales ratio is very high. And bonds are very expensive. And since you just talked about scams, I want to give you just one scam that is and should be obvious to every investor. At the present time, inflation is running by official statements at 5.4% per annum, okay? Private service, they say inflation is running at between 5 and 10% per annum. In other words, the cost of living of individual households is rising by more than 5% per annum. But the yield on the 10 years Treasury is around 1.6%. The yield on deposits is next to nothing. When I have a 3 months deposit, I get 0.3% annual basis. So what we have is a rate of inflation, of cost of living increases that is far higher than the return that you get from your investments in bonds and cash. This is expropriation. This is a scam. This is incorrect. And it will lead not to less inflation, but to more inflation. I can tell you I lived through.
So that means, Marc, what you're saying then is that we're going to have a collapse at some point because we're codependent on the money supply expansion and the Fed's quantitative easing. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, we will have a collapse in asset markets at some point. I wouldn't be able to tell you whether it's tomorrow or in 3 weeks. I can only tell you that at the present time, the American stock market is driven by only very few stocks that are rising and driving the indices higher, and that the typical stock isn't going up much. But as I said, it is a fraud. It is defrauding Americans who don't understand that what they get on their money in the bank and in treasury bonds is much inferior to the cost of living increases. In other words, if they keep their money in a 10 years treasury for the next 10 years, their purchasing power will have diminished very significantly. Mm-hmm. There's no question about this. These policies by the Federal Reserve are leading to an impoverishment of the majority of Americans. As simple as that.
So Marc, do you think, we say scam, and of course the result is it essentially acts as a scam for conservative investors. I get that. But do you think there's any ill intention on behalf of the central banks whereby they're intentionally trying to keep these rates down just because they want to keep the cost of their own debt down. So is there any intended scam, or is it just an inconsequential scam in your best opinion?
As I said, it is intended to bankrupt the majority of Americans. The pandemic, the reaction to the pandemic and the artificially low interest rates are beneficial to wealthy people, to asset holders, such as myself. I'm making these remarks as a socially responsible person, as a historian, economist, who has studied the political history, economic history. I can tell you this will lead to a disaster. The rich people are becoming richer, and the poor people are impoverished. Yeah. There's no question about this.
Yeah. Wait, just curious, getting off topic just a bit. Of course, one of the ways now that the Democrats are trying to solve the problem is by taxing wealth for extremely affluent individuals, taxing unrealized gains for the first time. But that's not the answer either, is it?
I want to tell you something about wealth taxes. Most countries have abandoned them because the cost of collecting them is much higher than what they were able to collect. If you have a few $1 billion or 100 billion, like some people have nowadays, do you think you can't afford to pay a few $1 million to the best lawyers around the world to protect you from taxation? The wealthy people will, we have statistics whether the tax rate was very high or very low. As a percent of the economy, the wealthy people have never paid much more than 18% of GDP.
Always some great words of wisdom, as usual, Dr. Faber. Thanks so much for being with us here on The Income Generation.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great. And please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel for more advice from financial advisors from around the country. And, of course, don't forget to click the thumbs up button if you like this video.